Today we're going to be looking at North Africa by Multiman Publishing. This is a board game that's part of their standard combat series made by the gamers. This is the first of the series that I've played. In fact, it's the first Multiman Publishing game that I've played. And we're going to be doing Operation Battleaxe today, which is a small scenario, just uses one of the big maps. There are 4 of these. I might do a review of the game if there's enough interest, where I'll show you the whole board and everything that's involved. But for today, we're just going to do Operation Battleaxe. This will be the second game that I've played. So for those of you not familiar with excuse me, with SCS games, you get these series rules. So these are the most up-to-date version 1.8. So this tells you how to fight, how to move, the sort of general rules that aren't specific to any particular game. And then the scenarios and the special rules come in the the rules for the particular edition that you've got. So this is North Africa. So in here we've got all of the rules for the various units, how the different icons work, how movement and supply works in this particular game. And then I believe there's 10 scenarios. So we can see here the start of the scenarios. I have already played Operation Brevity. Today I'm going to be doing Operation Battleaxe, and I'll take you through the game. It's a one-turn scenario, relatively small, not many counters. So I'll do a kind of a play-by-play of that so you can see how the game works. And then I'll just give you a quick look at some of the other scenarios in here. So this here is a 2-mapper, Operation Crusader. You can see here it lists everything out in terms of what units there are and where to put them. I will say as well, it was really easy to set up the scenario because the way that they label the hexes on these games is very good. Then we've got Ghazala, first Alamein, and then the campaign games. There's 5 campaign starts. So campaign games are done quite interestingly in this rule set. You don't have victory conditions for the campaign games. For these small scenarios, you do. You have to capture certain hexes, etc. But for the campaign games, you're basically just trying to drive your opponent out of Africa. So very historically accurate as far as that's concerned. Anyway, let's get straight on with setup. So in terms of setup, you can see here over on the east at Mersa Matra, we have a supply unit. We have a unit of Czechs, and we have 2 reduced South African units, all in this one pile here. So this is optional setup. The British units here are allowed to set up anywhere within 1 space of Mersa Matra. So I've decided to keep the kind of lower strength units back here with some supply, and then we've got 2 full strength units here. So we have a South African unit that can move 15 spaces. So if you're not aware, the number on the left is the attack factor, the smaller number in the middle is the defense factor, and the number on the right is the movement factor of a unit. So we've got a 15 movement unit here, and then this unit here has 11 movement. So they're not the strongest, a 4 and a 2, but they're pretty decent. So they will have to make their way all the way along this coastal road to get to the main area of the battle, which is over here. I won't go through every single stack because we'll be here all day, but essentially you can see here we've got some British and Commonwealth units sort of scattered about here. We've got some supply over this big stack in the middle, or rather it's a supply stack essentially. So we have 3 units of supply here, and as long as they're within 5 hexes of a unit, they're allowed to activate. And then we've got commanders and the actual combat units here. So we've got some armored units, quite a lot of armored units actually, and we do have some infantry in there as well somewhere. But it's mostly an armored battle, as you're probably aware. We have Rommel up here. We have some Italian units in Bardia. These light blue units here are Luftwaffe, so they are the flak battalions. So they're very strong anti-tank units. And then, as you can see, these are the dispositions of the Axis units. Just up here, we have the Axis supply, which is actually on map B, which is that way. So that those supply units are going to have to move onto the board at the start of the game for the Axis to be able to do anything. And you'll notice as well that the Axis have captured General O'Connor. victory conditions for this scenario are for either player to control Fort Capuzzo, Solemn, and both hexes adjoining Hellfire Pass. So the pass runs through here. That's the only way you can get through this area of, what do they call it? They call it escarpment. So this stuff here is escarpment. That road, Hellfire Pass, is the only way to get through. So these 4 hexes here are the victory conditions. If either side controls all 4 at the end of the game turn, then they're victorious. Partially controlling them or any other result is a draw. So the British have the initiative in this scenario. And they decided to go first, not wanting the Germans to be able to reinforce their 2 forts, which are located here and here. The British spent 2 of their supply units, as you can see here from this little stack, and that enabled them to do a full activation. A full activation lets you essentially not only move and attack with your units, but you can also spend airstrikes. So the British called in 2 of these airstrikes on this fort position here and on the Germans occupying Solemn. The Solemn airstrike wasn't successful, but we did manage to disorganize the units down in Hellfire Pass. Despite the fact they're in a fort, it was quite a good roll. Because they're in forts though, we can't perform an overrun attack. So the British have basically moved their units up in preparation for an attack when it's their next turn to activate. You take turns in this game activating, so the British did 1 activation. They can activate any units within 10 hexes. Earlier on I said it was 5, but that's incorrect. It's 10 hexes of supply unit. They can activate, they can do 1 action, so whether that's a move, attack, overrun, etc. But because these guys here are in a fort and these guys are in a fort, we can't actually overrun them. So the only combat we've had is between these 2 units here, or 2 stacks I should say. The British attacked Solemn, trying to drive these units out, but with 2-to-1 odds, which sounds good, but it's not that great. The British, this Indian regiment here, or Indian unit rather, took a step loss. So things aren't looking too good for the Brits at the moment. The Germans have just taken their first activation. And the main thing they did really was Rommel's units here moved down and they performed an overrun attack on these 2 Indian units. Although they had overwhelming odds, they rolled quite poorly, and that meant that both sides had to take a step loss. So the way step losses work in this game is you choose if no unit has taken any losses, then the strongest unit in the current stack has to take the first step loss. So although they did manage to weaken these Commonwealth units, they did take some losses themselves. What they're trying to do is push these Indian units here out of the northeastern section of Hellfire Pass. The other bit of combat that took place was over here on the western flank. These infantry units here, supported with anti-tank, actually sallied out of their fort and tried to bloody the 7th Armoured Division here on the left, but things didn't go too well and they actually took a step loss. I should also have done this as well. At the end of any limited or full activation, all disorganized markers get removed. So this gets removed. The Germans have 2 supply units remaining. They only spent 1 for the last turn. And the British have 2 as well. They've got the 1 over in the east, and they have 1 here, which we've just spent because we're going to try and perform some attacks around here and push the Germans out of Hellfire Pass. So I'll just show you how combat works. So what the British are going to do here with this spent supply unit is they are going to use these 3 stacks here, because you can attack from multiple hexes, but only 1 hex can ever be the defender in an attack. These 3 stacks here are all going to attack this fortified hex here in Hellfire Pass. We're trying to, they want to drive the Germans out of there so that we can get a little bit closer to them gaining the victory. So we have 2-to-1 odds. We have 30 combat attack power versus, it says 9 here, but forts double the defense strength of a unit. So we have 30 to 18, and the way that the combat factors work in this game, you round to the nearest whole number. So if it's a 5, if it's a 0.5, you round up. If it's up to a 0.4, 49, then you round down. So we have 1.6 is the odds, so that is a 2 to 1, I guess, rounded up. So 2 to 1 odds. We roll 2d6, we got a 6, and on the 2 to 1 odds result, that is attacker 1, defender 1. So both sides need to take a step loss. So the defenders, obviously they only have 1 unit, so that is nice and easy for them. And then for the attackers, you have to pick the strongest unit in any hex. So the attacker can decide here, we'll take this one. Now, Campbell is in the battle, but the British did not elect to use his combat shift ability in this particular attack, because if you do that, then there is a risk that your leader can die. Just need to make a correction there. In terms of the unit on the British side that would take a step loss, it would have to be this one here, because it is the strongest unit. It doesn't say anything about it has to come from, you can pick the hex. So the strongest unit involved in the attack must be the one that takes the step loss. So it's this 7th armoured unit here that takes the loss. One of the interesting things about this game is the different considerations that you have to have for the position that the units are currently in, and then as well as, even though this is only a 1-turn scenario, you're thinking, for example, do we want to be attacking with these units? Because I will be able to activate the British again later on in this turn. Now this isn't great to have 1, 2, 3 against 3 for these defender units. We're probably going to lose some of these, and at the moment they're holding one of the objective hexes on the northeastern part of Hellfire Pass. I've got to get better at using these tweezers. So yeah, as I was saying, so you're kind of thinking, it might be tempting to an attack now with 1-to-1 odds, which isn't great, but at least it's not, in favour of the defender. But actually, in a situation like this, it's probably best to leave these here, because they are holding the objective, and it means that if these guys were to attack them, first of all, they wouldn't be able to because they're a 0, but that they do have a stronger defensive strength. They would have a 4 in defense, so it makes sense to leave these guys here. So even just within 1 turn of this small scenario, it leaves you thinking about what comes next, what comes ahead. Yes, you can just act impulsively and attack because you might have a really strong unit, but even just within the space of 1 turn, things can turn around. It's quite a swift flowing game, and the movement speeds and the way that you can exploit with these rules, it does give you the impression of combat in this theatre. It's very well done. So now that the British have acted, it now goes back to the Germans' turn, and they want to try and, at the moment it's going to be a draw. It looks like it's going to be easier for the Germans to win currently than it is the British, because the British have only got 1 objective hex, the Germans have got the other 3, these 2 here and this one. So what it might make sense for the Germans to do, so what they would do is, they've got 2 supply units left and they have access to 2 airstrikes. Now airstrikes can only be used in a full activation, which costs 2 supply units. That represents huge amounts of resources, fuel, munitions being built up, and a large air campaign taking place as part of a battle, which is why it costs double. So what I think makes sense for the Germans to do would be to spend both of these. So we'll just flip these over, and they are going to try and soften up some of these Brits before making the attack. So it would make sense to send 1 airstrike here against these Indian units, and then the second airstrike it doesn't really matter too much, but because this here is the British, like is the strongest stack the British have that's threatening their objective hex in Hellfire Pass, it makes sense to try and soften them up a bit with an airstrike. So there's no forts in either of these locations. So the way airstrikes work, I'll just bring this dice tower back into focus for you, is you roll a single d6 and you're looking to score the number printed on the counter or lower. So airstrikes have a rating of 4. So we will do this western one first. So we're looking for a 4 or less. 3. So that airstrike is successful. What that means is we remove that counter, and then that unit is now disorganized. Now we'll do the second airstrike. That's a 3, which is also a success. So what we do is we get another disorder counter and put that on them as well. So that's going to go just on there. So things are looking quite good for the Germans here. They've managed to soften up some of the Brit units, meaning that they're now going to be a lot easier to push out of their hexes. Let's see how they get on with that. So the first attack for the Germans is over here on this western sector. So they're declaring an attack with these 2 units, or these 2 stacks here against this stack. And because of the disorder marker, that means that the defense of this British stack is halved. So the odds work out that we have a 2-to-1 odds in favor of the Germans. Not brilliant, but you know, we're trying to drive the British out of here, so we're feeling lucky. 2d6, 7, not too bad. 2-to-1 odds, 7. Defender loses 1 step and retreats 1. So they've already taken. No, they don't have a step loss yet. So this top unit here is the most powerful unit. So that takes a step loss, and then they have to retreat 1 hex. So for retreating, generally you need to move towards a supply source, but you are allowed to avoid enemy zones of control, even if it violates that first rule. So these British units here, well, actually, it doesn't really matter where they go to, because if we go here, they're within enemy zone of control, but moving slightly towards the east will mean that they are towards a supply source. So that's where they're going to go. So there's a stacking limit of 4 combat units per hex. So that's 4 combat units, and then leaders don't count towards that. So that is a valid retreat move there for the British. The next German activation, or not activation rather, but combat is here. So Rommel's stack here is going to attack these defending Brits. We have odds of 6.5 to 1. Because we've already worked out the odds, and because we knew that we had quite a powerful stack, we elected not to use the leader ability. So the way leaders work is they allow you to shift the column on the combat results table, but you have to declare that before you work out combat odds, because it comes with the risk of your leader being killed or captured. But the German player, you know, we know that they've got a decent stack. We can remember that the Indians have taken a lot of damage. You're not allowed to inspect stacks in this game, but obviously if you can remember things, then that's fine. So we're attacking here with 6.5 to 1. That gets rounded to 7, but the highest in the game is 5 to 1 odds. So we roll 2 dice. 10 is excellent. So 10 means the defender has to lose 3 steps and retreat 5 spaces. Now they've only got 2 units, so both of these units are eliminated from the game. We'll get rid of the disorder marker. There's no one there to retreat, so the Germans have successfully driven the Allies out of the northeastern Hellfire Pass. As the defender's hex has been vacated, the attacker is allowed to advance after combat, meaning that they now control all 4 of the victory hexes. And the final action of this game was the British. They spent their final supply point bringing up some reinforcements from Mersa Mutra. So these are going to play no further part in this game because To enter an enemy zone of control costs an additional 1 point, and you need to spend even more than that if you want to perform an overrun attack. And because this unit only has 11, we've already spent most of our points moving along this coastal road. So the game is over. It's a clear German victory. Both sides took some damage, but the British are clearly the worst off here. The Germans obviously started in control of the majority of the hexes, but the Brits actually lost 2 of their units completely. So in a full campaign game, those units would be put into a cup and they can come back as reinforcements. And you know, these units here, although they're not doing anything this turn, this is where the game becomes a lot more about thought and strategic planning, because you're trying to think about where are you going to put reinforcements. You might want a second line of defense down here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to playing some of the biggest scenarios, because the gameplay is very simple, as hopefully you've been able to see. The combat's nice and simple. The supply rules are very simple as well, but I think they do a really good job of making you think about where your supply units are, and keeping supply units spread out, because you don't want them all at the front, because if they're all at the front you can't bring reinforcements up, and vice versa. If you keep them all far behind the lines where they're not in any trouble, then there's not much you're going to be able to do with your frontline units. So my first impressions after playing 2 games of this is that it's a really well designed game. I know that the SCS series has been around for some time now, but yeah, this is the first one I've played. Definitely enjoying it, and yeah, as I say at the start, I'll think about doing a full review, giving you a bit more of an overview of how the game actually works and showing you all of the maps, because as you can tell, really nice artwork on here. I love the colours that they've used for the maps. Everything's very well designed. It's got all these notes on the board, and all 4 maps as well have got plenty of player aids and all kinds of important information that just makes it a lot easier for you to play the game. So yeah, this has been a short overview of North Africa, Afrika Korps versus Desert Rats, Operation Battleaxe, and yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot.